Hello everyone and welcome to this FT Live Digital Dialogues event from a rainy afternoon in London. I've got many other people from other parts of the world where I hope it's better. I hope you're all sitting comfortably as we're going to put to the test some of the challenges and opportunities for businesses associated with our shift to living and interacting more online. Obviously a big shift during the pandemic, but set to last, as we all say, the acceleration of trends that were probably there before. Whether it's working from home or shopping online or chatting to our families, it's presented a lot of different challenges and opportunities to businesses. I'm Alice Hancock, the FT's Leisure Industries reporter, and from the businesses I speak to, restaurants, hotels and so forth, there's a really interesting challenge in this whole world of translating the real world, the human world, and into the digital existence. I'm delighted that I've got some much better qualified people to unpick these challenges and opportunities with me today. So in no order, I would like to introduce Will Gordy, Director of Workplace and Customer Experience at the telecoms company Verizon, who are kindly supporting this. We're also joined by Kim Costello, Chief Marketing Officer for Pendragon, the car retailer. We have Andre Kirkland, who heads up Twitter's platform health operations team. And also Danny McCauley, Senior Vice President and Customer Experience Leader in Voluntary Benefits and Enrollment Solutions at the insurer Aon. First off, thank you all for giving your time very generously. There is a lot to talk about, and we are obviously living the digital world here in this forum. I wanted to mention to the audience before we kick off, there's lots of chance to ask questions. So please, just the best way to do it, I think, is to drop them into the chat via the Q&A box on the right of your screen, you'll see. And we will endeavour to answer as many as we can in the final 10 minutes or so of this discussion. You can also, of course, social media platforms are available, not just Twitter, but I would recommend Twitter's hashtag FT Digital Dialogues. And do please share your thoughts and tweets on there, and we'll try and keep an eye on those as well. Now, to kick off, I think maybe we should take an example from the real world. Will, I wanted to ask what the last interaction you had with a company other than your own, and what interface it was. And it would be great if you could sort of give us a bit of an idea of how that interaction has really spoken to the new way of communicating with customers in this post-COVID world.
Sure, and that's a great question. So in January, I had the opportunity to purchase a new car, which I don't know if this is the best time in history to buy a car, but here I am. I digitally engaged with 4 different companies, looking at their inventory, because clearly I was trying to make a decision, not only what type of car did I want to purchase, but new versus used. So almost universally, I started through the digital channel, whether it was chat or on a website. All the companies asked me for my contact information. They asked me for my preferences, do I want to be contacted in the evening, during the day. But what was really interesting that the company that I bought the car from really personalized their interaction with me. It was a perfect blend of the kind of the digital world and that human touch. They knew that I'm a pretty busy executive, so calling me in the middle of the workday is probably not ideal. And I'm not going to be able to respond to a ton of emails, but they used SMS, they used text, during the day to ask me a couple of qualifying questions, as we were working through the inventory and what is available, that blending the digital, let me see the car, see the pictures with the kind of that human touch, the hyper personalization of how they were engaging with me. Was really a blended experience that I really appreciated. For the 3 companies that I did not do business with, they didn't change their approach. They're still emailing me. They're still calling me in the middle of my business day, I have since moved on. So that was a really good learning experience for me as a consumer, of how to blend the both worlds, the digital with the human touch.
It's really interesting what you mentioned about personalization and what this digital world offers companies in terms of accessing consumers and tapping into those exact things that we now want. I don't know, Kim, as a more consumer facing brand, you can kind of speak to how you maximize that as an opportunity and what the potential pitfalls are. I mean, Will obviously mentioned that contacting in the middle of the day is not helpful and a bit off-putting. So how as a company do you attack that?
Yeah, so I think what we see is we have our used vehicle operation that we've moved into a hybrid. As it's a unique hybrid proposition right now. What we see is kind of exactly what Will just described. We have very busy people that want to be met wherever they are in their buying, selling, or servicing journey. So therefore, we need to tailor in hyper-personalized ways our communication to our potential customers. Now, whether we do that through, as Will said, SMS, email, social media, it's really making sure we meet the customer wherever they are. And what we're seeing coming out of the pandemic especially is that only 12% of people want sole customer journeys, right? The rest of our purchasers, our potential customers, want a true hybrid experience. So we want to make sure if they're at a position where they have positive equity in their vehicle, that we're letting them know that, and then letting them interact with us either digitally, through email, chat, SMS, phone, however they so choose, or come into one of our experience centers, like one of our car store centers that I'm sitting in, and see the car, touch the car, feel the car, test drive the car, because it's a tactical, very large purchase. And it is pretty much the second largest purchase that most people make. So we are using our first party data, especially with everything that's going on over here in Europe and in the UK with cookies and third-party data. We really are using our first-party data, tapping to that with CDP and CRM campaigns in order to meet those customers where they are.
Interesting. We'll touch definitely. There's worth touching on the cookies element later, but just out of pure curiosity, how many people just buy a car without test driving it and never see it in real life before?
So it's increased significantly, right? So looking with what happened with the shutdown, especially over here in the UK, was a bit more aggressive of a shutdown than a lot of places in the US. So we had substantial interaction solely. It had to be solely digital while we were locked down. But we went from about 50% of people wanting full delivery to their home to now, like I said, it's scaled back where we have about 12% of people that are interested in doing everything fully online without ever engaging with a person. So the majority of people, what we're finding is really want that hybrid approach. So they want the ability to start that purchase journey, much like Will did, online and do some research, and then either come into the dealership, talk to somebody face to face, return to home and have the vehicle delivered, or come in, it's something thereof, come in and drive the vehicle away, or that 12% that do want that full digital experience. So it really is a unique position that we're in as in the automotive sector, because it's something prior to the pandemic that was really not done, especially over here in the UK, where you could fully transact online.
Yeah, really interesting. And Danny, tell me, on the employee side, obviously you're very much more focused on that. How's this kind of hybrid approach, this access to multiple channels, has it increased the expectations of what people can do and what people expect from their employers?
So absolutely, it has. The pandemic saw a very interesting digital transformation across all generations in the workforce. And I think that in itself created a new environment where individual consumers in their insurance buying experience want every one of those benefits. Once again, you'll hear this word over and over again, hyper-personalized to their objective needs, so that the five of us talking on this call today would and should all have different journeys and different recommendations using first-party data. Once again, critical in the employee benefit space, it's always going to be that first-party data. But what we are seeing is employees are willing to share more details about their current situation in order to get more refined recommendations. So we are seeing a greater adoption of decision support tools, but equally as important is while that journey, 92% of our journeys are starting self-service, 10+% are going and picking up a lifeline, if you will, whether they choose to make that a text, whether they choose to make that a call, or they choose to do some other form of engagement, calling HR. So oftentimes in every one of those, they want that lifeline to be served to them in the way that is easy for them to engage. So I think hyper-personalizing it becomes easier because consumers are willing to share their medical kind of background in order to make the right plan selection. And in the US, those plan selections vary so dramatically that getting the right decision at that right time, we're absolutely seeing a hybrid. And many employers are going with a self-service first approach, but that self-service first approach especially relies on having omni-channel solutions for employees when they want it.
Interesting. And do you think that has an impact on the attractiveness of companies for employees if they don't offer these services across all platforms?
It does. I think there is a human employee condition of individuals calling HR. So think about it. We all have regular experiences as workers. And if we need something within HR, there's an expectation that HR has digitally transformed as well. And the way in which all of us are interacting with our employer has become more self-service. That has a price in that employee satisfaction can go down if people are hunting too hard for the information they need. So right message, right time, once again, becomes even more important in an HR environment. And frankly, with the Great Resignation and how strong the job market is, every aspect of an employee's experience should be considered. And specifically how we support employees is in their benefits, education, engagement, and enrollment. But that applies across all things HR, in how are we reaching HR and how are we giving content that does not feel like I'm searching a phone book.
Sure. And in this great age of hyper-personalization, it's made me feel like incredibly fussy as a consumer, because I know I would prefer to be accessed in the way that I would want, and this is all excellent. But Andrea, as someone who watches Twitter, you're very involved in the kind of seeing these consumer trends as they happen. How are companies monitoring that? How are they kind of reacting to those personalized demands, and what technology are they wanting to source from people like you in order to understand those better?
Well, I think the one thing, and maybe we've all had this type of experience, but consumers will let you know what they want. They will be very loud about it in some way, shape, or form. Particularly on our platform, it's a voice. It's a call to action, if you will. It's not uncommon to be added if someone asks you and say, "Hey, I need help," or what have you, or DMs. Consumers are very vocal when they want help. I think it goes straight to Kim's point about meeting the customers where they are. If you're not doing so, they will let you know. And I think that's the key element to customer support and communicating with digital customers in the digital age, right? I think we'll give a great example in terms of, hey, I am a busy executive. I can't be on the phone all day or respond immediately to emails, but I can respond quickly to a text message, right? And so if you don't have those systems in place or those outlets in place for customers to reach you and get whatever output they're looking for, they'll let you know.
Well, and I think that one thing to add on to that, there's a study, I believe it was Epsilon, that showed 80% of customers are more willing to purchase from a company who personalizes their marketing messages to them. And then there was another a study that was I think it was 91% of customers are more likely to shop with brands who meet them when they want to be met with products that are tailored to them. So what you hear is the customer is shouting, "We want hyper-personalized content that's applicable to us, and we want you to know when we're in market shopping for that." I think the juxtaposition of that is you also have customers at the same time saying, we don't want to just be splash marketed by everybody. We're very concerned about our privacy, how you as a company hold our data, and how you use our data. So I think more than ever as companies and as marketers, we are under the spotlight to make sure we do curtail that information to make it exactly what we know our customer wants. So we use that AI to the fullest, and we don't waste that touch point with a customer, because we all know once you market the wrong thing to them or hit them at the wrong time, you risk the chance of losing them forever. And that is a very scary thing, especially as we move towards first party data only, and we no longer have that ability to source data from third party sources.
Yeah. Actually, Kim, I remember when we last spoke, you had an interesting concept, the looping journey,
Yeah.
and like meeting customers where they are. Do you want to expand on that a bit for our audience briefly,
Sure.
just so they get a sense of it?
So I think historically, it's, and especially I'm going to speak to it as in the automotive sector, but I think it's applicable to just about everybody. In the automotive sector, it was more of a linear customer journey, right? You had the customer started their process, they purchased a vehicle, they walked out the door at the vehicle, and then maybe they serviced the vehicle if you're lucky. So it was a very linear, you had some touch points. Well, now you have more of a looping customer journey, right? They come in and out of that customer journey with these omni-channel experiences. So to the point that maybe they pop in online, as Will explained how he started his journey, and then pop out and come into the dealership. And maybe they pop in then when you send them that text message and you get them back in. And they really start the journey, and there's so many different avenues for them to take that it's no longer, you can no longer hit them exact points. Like, okay, it's been a month. I know I need to make contact here, because that's just not how people digest information anymore. So it's more of a looping customer journey, and it's how you touch your customers, how you market to them, and make sure that you touch them at those points in which they want to be engaged with. And that goes from a buying, selling, and servicing journey for us. Because once you purchase the car, I want to keep you in my life cycle, that you service your vehicle. Then when you're ready to sell the vehicle, you come back to me and then you buy your next vehicle. And so it's that looping journey all the way through in each of those individual journeys, for lack of a better word.
I can actually create a correlation to employees in that same concept. If you think about an employee's lifetime journey, we think about it as life events, and those life events, getting married, having a baby, changing addresses, changing jobs, every one of those life events is a moment where benefits and the decisions they've made about their benefits resurfaces and gets re-highlighted. If somebody was injured and had to go to the hospital, that's an elevated moment, or what we call moments that matter. And in an HR world, it's about having those variety of choices. And frankly, these days, it's got to be servable on your phone so that you can quickly, be able to access whatever that third-party vendor or that doctor or that hospital that you're trying to get. But really, we think about it as life event looping, which is, how does a life event have broader implications across your life and the benefits that you may choose or elect for your family.
And I suppose especially important to that, and I know, Will, this is something you spoke eloquently about before, is that trying to get that human side to these communications in, like how, it's great having all these touch points, but making sure it has a human face, or how important is that? And how do companies make sure that they maintain that, we're real people behind all the screens?
Well, yeah, but first I want to go back to what Kim and Andy just mentioned. I would argue before, in a sales organization, it was more the seller's journey is what we were tracking, not so much the buyer's journey, right? I think now we're getting a little more insights. The same thing for Danny, for the employee, as they're having those experiences before, maybe HR would have reacted to that rather than proactively offering, right, recommendations. As far as the human versus digital, I think it's really important for companies not to fake it. Right. And so if I'm dealing with a chatbot and there isn't a human behind it, that is okay. Just let me know that before I get frustrated. Right. Because if I'm asking specific things, I'm not getting the answers. Right. Don't make me do it all over again. Right. Just let me know. Hey, I am a chatbot. Right. I'm here to field your first questions. Right. And then, if we need to opt out to talk to a live human being or have a chat with a human being, right, offer me that before I'm frustrated. Right. And I think we look at our digital journeys. It started with omni-channel, but it really started for us to contain the cost a little bit, right, in the contact center environment. And I think if anything has happened over the last 2 years, we've kind of flipped that, and now it's all about the hyper-personalization and, right, really tailoring it to the needs of the consumer, in my case, right, so that I have a great experience. And now Kim, in her organization, will get more insights and kind of, what am I really trying to accomplish? Am I just looking what's out there? Is there a trigger event, right? Where am I on that journey? So she doesn't have to wait 2 years from now or 3 years from now when I want to restart that buyer's journey again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's super important. And Andre, I mean, do you see this in terms of what people are demanding? Companies are demanding from Twitter in terms of the apps they can use, in terms of the technology that offers. and what Twitter can do with that sort of customer human interaction.
So we support our commercial and private, or we'll say non-professional, non-commercial developers in supporting whatever apps they want to build, as long as it adheres to our policies. So in terms of whatever apps they want to create in order to, we'll say, elicit a certain consumer journey or customer journey, again, as long as it adheres to our policies, and we support identifying their business case or reviewing their business case, making sure that's as strong as possible for granting it access to our APIs. That's specifically one of the halves of my scope, just to make sure that, again, everything remains in our policies. But from a developer or app standpoint, if something does need to, if there is a business case there, then we wholeheartedly support that and give them approval to our API.
And I think what's really interesting, so we have a couple of things that I did want to just touch on that. So in our new car store proposition, we do have a wheel of values, and in the center is human, because we believe that you have to be human at your core, right? You can be a digitally led proposition. You can have all the technology that you should be using and you have to have in this day and age, all the AI you want, but you have to Will's point and to Andre's point and Dan's point, you have to have a human behind that. I think that's really important, because when there's only so much you can do, AI robots are programmed by humans. So there are flaws that can happen based on the human programming. So you do need to be human at your core. And I think that's important for customers. I also, we work very closely with Twitter and various other social media platforms, because what you're seeing now, and I love stats, is you have 80% of like the boomer generation uses social media in order to increase their life satisfaction. So for us, it's without question that we have to meet them there, because that's where they're spending their extra time and that's where they're looking to increase their satisfaction. So why not meet them there in order to add to their life with a new vehicle? So I think that, being human at your core is essential. And I think that using the social media channels and platforms is without question where you need to go to meet a lot of your customers. And what used to be thought of as your younger customers, it's really not anymore. It expands across every generation, every sex, every ethnicity, everything. You really have to, that's where your customers are spending their time. So that's where you have to go to meet them.
You actually brought me on to exactly what I wanted to ask about, which was this, given this opening up of communication, this ability to talk to people on so many different channels and platforms in different ways. Obviously, different demographics want to talk in different ways. I'm a terrible millennial in that I still like to pick up the old-fashioned phone, but I know that lots of my generation want to text or chatbot, whatever. So how are you guys? How do companies attack that? Making sure that they are reaching the right generations in the right way, I think is the thing that probably people would want to know. I don't know if Danny, you want to speak to that, or Kim?
Yeah, I can certainly start and share that when we are consulting with employers on how they educate and engage with their employees, it's really about understanding the data, that demographic, or in our instance, a census data, to really understand where the employee populations fall across the demographic profile, and more importantly, aligning to product match. So in a benefits portfolio, obviously there is a trend that you see more choice is better when it comes to benefits, when employers are thinking about offering those benefits. But there is such a thing as too much choice. So it comes down to this curation of the right choices with the right breadth. And frankly, just as digital transformation has happened in the last couple of years in the employee benefit space, data and analytics has also had to arise. One of the reasons why I think we have a digital transformation is that data and analytics in the employer-employee space has reached a point of sophistication where you can tighter to the specific audience, the specific persona, and multi-channel availability. But it absolutely has to have that commonality and reducing the number of selections. And I would imagine that Kim would think about a retail application that says, if Danny comes into her dealership and is looking at cars, they're not going to show me 12 cars. They're probably going to show me 3.
Well, I think that goes to the human element, right?
Yes,
so we've
absolutely.
In CarStore, we have personal advisors. So our job is to listen to the customer, ask the questions, and then make recommendations based on what you're saying. If you come in with a family of 6 and you're looking at how to get the kids to and from school safely, showing you a 2-seat convertible is probably not going to be what you're interested in, right? So it's asking the right questions and listening and then advising the customer, not a hard sell. And so I think that's really what the human element, that's a huge portion of it. When it comes to demographics, I think it's really interesting. It used to just be like male, female, ages 18 to 35 want this, 35 to 55, and that was it. And I think that's something that as a society, we are starting to see change, and it's necessary, right? It's not just about gender. It's not just about age. It's about ethnicity, race, sexual identification, all of these things, and how we communicate to our customers and show them that we listen and can adhere to what they want. So I think to your point, yes, we don't want to overstimulate with too many options that aren't what you want, because that's a mistake. That's not meeting the customer where they are, where they need to be. And when segmentation is important, and demographics are obviously essential and important when it comes to marketing, but also having that human element keeps you from painting with a broad brush, right? Because when you start painting with a broad brush, you make mistakes. To your point, Alice, you don't like a chatbot. You like picking up the phone. I do too. I have one of the guys I work with who's about 20 years older than me, likes a chatbot. So this goes directly against what it's supposed to be. So you have to give the customers options to engage with you in the way that makes sense to them. Twitter's a great way. When somebody's upset, they tweet out, and this gives, rightly or wrongly, good or bad, it gives immediate attention to that issue and allows any business to jump on it and correct it.
And just to jump in there, Alice, real quick, because that's the human piece, the human element. But that's sometimes a challenge for maybe digital first companies who may not have that manpower or that human element prioritized. So going back to what Danny mentioned in terms of, yes, having that menu, but not such an expansive menu that's a cost to the organization to maintain or create or what have you. So what information can we provide for, again, the demographics? And do people prefer instructions or frequently asked questions to read through, right? Do they want to have videos to watch, a YouTube tutorial, right? Give me a YouTube tutorial watch. I'll do it on my own all day. That's the type of person I am. And then from a demographic standpoint, what about accessibility? Right? If someone isn't able to kind of read or kind of be able to use other we'll say typical outlets that others are, that adds a whole nother challenge. So it's all these things that from a digital standpoint, a digital first org standpoint, that we have to take into consideration as it relates to customer support or customer experience.
And storing the digital experiences that people choose. That's why I said data and analytics is really a key component to this, because we have had this digital footprint for years, but we're not using it to inform how we go back to a customer, and we need to.
Really interesting. And really interesting your point about accessibility, Andrea. I think it's not talked about enough, probably, actually. People who can't access in the way that we accept that we can. It brings me nicely, though, onto our point about data, because actually, we've got all this personalization, and that's great, and we know loads about our customer, and that's great. But how do we protect that data that we own? And obviously, it's as you pointed out earlier, Kim, in the EU and the UK, there's a lot of protections coming in around that. But could you perhaps, or I don't know, Willa, if you wanted to comment at this point, on how customer privacy and data can best be protected in this kind of digitized consumer journey that we are now on?
Well, I think, first of all, customers need to know what we're doing with their data, where we're getting the data from, right? We need to give them some choice, right? Just like on social media, how we maybe trade and trust, right, for something that we're going to benefit from. I think the same thing is between the consumer and a company as well. One of the things that we haven't talked about yet is overall compliance and governance and security, right? I think we have some new vulnerabilities, not just because we're moved more towards the digital channel, but also the fact that contact centers have moved home, right? And so some of the things that we were able to very easily get our arms around, like PCI compliance and other for the credit card industry, a little bit more challenging, right, for you working from home, right? And so I think what consumers want is they want transparency. They want to be able to trust how you're using their data, their private information. And they also want us to disclose very quickly, right, when there's been a breach or something else, right? And so we've seen some brands, right? I'm not going to mention them here, but we've seen some brands take some big hits over the last 2 years, right, for how they use data. And I think that's something that we need to be cognizant of. And then the governance and compliance, depending on where you are in the world or what demographic you happen to serve, or that person's individual choice, is something that's going to really be top of mind. And I think we're going to see a lot of investments, right, in tools and processes and procedures to support that.
We've certainly seen cybersecurity as a consulting business explode in the last few years. No surprise, as we continue to spread out our workforces, and effectively every one of our homes becomes a workplace now. And so protecting the walls of every one of our homes becomes an added responsibility at an employer level, so that Andre and Will and Kim are all coming to us from their business networks, and they have a certain sense of security and confirmation of protection.
And does that go down to the hardware that's being, that needs to be in these homes, or are we talking just sort of codes of conduct that companies are interested in?
I think it's double encryption. It's all of the regular forms of security that we've come to expect from our buying grocery experience online, and then taking it to that next level, because we could be dealing, certainly in the employee space, you're dealing with very, very sensitive personal health information. So there's additional requirements and legislative protections for that privacy of that information you have to comply with.
I think there's so many layers to that onion, Alice, right? So think about if you restarted your career tomorrow. First thing you need to handle is what is your compute? Are you bringing your own laptop? Are we doing a virtual desktop? Are you getting a new device from your employer? What about broadband access, right? Let's face it, broadband experience is not the same everywhere, right? And so we're starting to see companies looking at leveraging technologies like 5G, right? Where, maybe you're a caregiver, maybe you have kids streaming Netflix or online school, right? So that is only your business connection. You're using wireless for that. Think about voice firewalls, where we could, identify where calls are coming from that should not even make it to you, right? Voice biometrics, all these other things that we can do to kind of hopefully mitigate some of the spoofing and other things, right, that is happening in the industry. And I think over time, right, those threat vectors, right, they're going to continue to expand, right? And this is going to be an area of focus. And candidly, I think it's gotten a little bit worse since we moved to a primary hybrid, or in case for contact center, primarily work from home environment. It was a little bit easier to enforce, right, the compliance when we were on campus. And so I think we're going to have to invest in technology to help us with that transition.
I'm actually thinking, you guys from big businesses, a lot of resources to put into these kind of things. But what about the small businesses? This is challenging. They might not have the expertise. They might not be able to hire the expertise. What advice would any of you give? I don't know if, Andre, your interactions perhaps with some smaller companies, you might be able to point out areas that they might need to pay attention to.
Maybe not necessarily pay attention to, but I think that they actually have an advantage there. When you look at a large corporation, a large organization that's globally distributed, as Will mentioned, 5G or broadband isn't the same as in some places as others. Hardware and accessibility, that isn't as widely as available. But if you have a smaller company, a smaller footprint, smaller number of devices to manage, a smaller number of headcount to take account for, maybe you are now able to work to a small office, or instead of 100 remote homes or what have you. That's where I think that the smaller companies actually have an advantage compared to the larger companies. And then you also see with ransomware or ransom attacks, right? Those smaller companies may not be as valuable or lucrative for spammers or scammers in that regard. So they're going to go after those big ticket or big high value organizations. So I think from that standpoint, it would behoove the larger organizations to make sure that they are well maintained from a cybersecurity standpoint versus the smaller business. I mean, every organization should focus on it, but I think the smaller businesses do have an advantage there.
Absolutely. So it's a priority for us. We deal with tons of customer data when you're selling vehicles. We also have a technology company. leasing company and a parts company. So we have a lot of customer information, and then we deal with financing and in between the banks. So it's definitely a priority for us, and it's making sure we have a strong IT department and a strong chief information officer who is up to date on the latest, tech, and it's implemented correctly. So it's a never-ending process. The second you think you're protected, there's somebody that's out there trying to figure out a way to beat you. So it is just this constant, moving forward. If you're standing still, you're done. So you have to constantly be on top of this. So I think it is one of the biggest challenges that all companies face as we move to this ever increasing technology world where you put in your information for everything. And then you have bioscreening, you have all sorts of stuff that just has more and more information for you out there in the metaverse. So I think it's really important that you stay on top of it. And the companies, we have a responsibility for our customers that we stay on top of the best we can and protect their data. So it's definitely a priority for us.
Yeah. Out of interest, how big is your IT department now since the pandemic? Just how much has that sort of grown headcount?
For me specifically, so like for us specifically, it is one of those things that we're constantly trying to make sure we have a robust IT department. And again, we have a technology company that sits separate from us, and so they're constantly making sure that they also have the right amount of people, and not just that, the right people. So it's not just filling bodies and putting people in there. It's having the right people in there that are up to date on the latest of what's going on. So we have a robust IT department to make sure that we stay ahead of as many threats as possible.
Well, but the interesting thing is, since we all moved home, I remember pre-pandemic, I was hybrid, right? But working from home or working from a Starbucks, that was my personal choice. Then I didn't have a choice anymore, right? And so I think every one of our employees became their own IT person overnight, right? Contact center agents overnight became knowledge workers, right? Maybe they were, maybe they weren't before, right? And then they're all their own IT person when something's wrong, right? The employer could make it so far into looking into the network, right? But then what happens in the home? So I think we need to consider that moving forward, right? And I think we talked about this before about the correlation between kind of that engaged employee and customer experiences, right? All this technology, all the compliance, everything else that ties back into that, that employee being engaged, right? And ultimately the experiences we give our consumers and customers.
And I do think consumers and customers and even employers are gaining a level of sophistication around a digital journey, that the expectation in a B2B world where you're looking for selection, that the level of depth employers are going to today to make sure they have that secure environment is profoundly greater than it was pre-pandemic.
I'm conscious of time, and I've actually had some excellent questions coming in, and a lot of them. So I'm going to start firing out some audience participation, as it were. So I think I'll aim this one at Will, for starters. What investment do you think is mostly important in leveraging digital transformation and serving your customers given this rapid change?
Yeah, well, I think we're going to have to continue to invest in analytics, but I think in parallel to that is some of the security compliance things that we talked about. I think that's where most of our budgets are going to shift to in the very near future, right? Making sure that person is who we really think they are, right? Making sure that some of the fraud calls, right, are mitigated. So I think it's a blend between the analytics and security.
Mm-hmm. Stanley, is that something you'd agree with?
I would. I think for us, it's security, and it's certainly data and analytics around customer journeys. So, in a benefits environment, the expectation wasn't there up until the last 3 to 5 years, and the pandemic really just put it on fast forward.
And there's one up from an upset customer here, but not for any of your companies, I don't think, saying, I haven't experienced a seamless omni-channel experience recently, i.e. apps, websites, telephone support all ask me again and again for this and that piece of information. I think we probably all can speak to that sometimes. Why is it so difficult for companies to deliver this? Kim, do you want to explain some of the challenges perhaps?
Absolutely. So I think there's a lot of products out there, right? And companies want to serve their customers as best as they possibly can. It doesn't mean that they're always purchasing the right product. It doesn't mean that the product they're purchasing can do everything that they've been told it can do. And it doesn't mean that it marries up with the technology. So there's a lot of spend on MarTech that just isn't right for a company. So sometimes a company is buying a Ferrari when they don't know how to drive yet. They don't have their learner's permit. It's too advanced. Other times they're buying a product that it just doesn't meet the needs of the business, whether that be because of spend, whether that be because of lack of knowledge, whatever it is. So it just doesn't marry up. So they have a variety of choices for the customer, but they don't have either the manpower or the technology to marry those up. So therefore you get a frustrated customer journey that has broken touch points. So I think in the past it used to be, interact with the customer as much as possible on their journey. And that's how you have a successful, relationship with the customer. Well, you don't want that. You don't necessarily want a frictionless customer journey because then you can lose the customer, but there has to be an appropriate amount of friction there. So I think from my standpoint, what I've seen before is it's not the right product for the right company. It's the products don't marry up because you have so many different things that don't talk to each other, and you can't go from all these dashboards to all these dashboards without losing the customer and making them re-input their stuff. So that's, in my experience, usually what the problem is.
I was enjoying the car metaphor.
You like the car metaphor? I'm good with those.
Sorry, Andrew, go for it.
No, just some visibility to the I guess the back end of it for the particular person, because sometimes it can be just a native constraint of the organization. As Ken mentioned, yeah, we have different tools and products out there that maybe just grab it off the shelf. That's not the case for every organization, because sometimes there are in-house legacy systems that have been built and coded over the years that now if you kind of take one pin out of or one line of code, it crashes the whole system. Right. And so then that goes into, well, how do you still deliver something that consumers want? Because, hey, consumers interact with chatbots. However, based on our internal architecture, we aren't able to best, we'll say, capture the information or relay the information between systems. Right. So there is that systems limitation there. And then also that goes into we'll say the process mapping or the process journey of the getting whatever result the customer wants to that, because internally, if we don't do that homework, then we don't see the gaps of, hey, there is that limitation from a system standpoint, but here's a fix that we can put into it, more code. Here's something that we can do to actually get the information to that chatbot so the customer doesn't have to re-input that information. So it's a limitation, and there's also due diligence with doing the homework.
And I think to that point, what Andre just said is also identifying when the product is just not fit for purpose. Because I think that can be a constraint, right? You've made, as a company, you've made an investment. It may have been a substantial investment. It may not have been that long ago, and it's just not fit for purpose anymore. Technology's moved past. You can't put a plaster on it. You got to bin it and find something that works for the company.
If I could add, I think one of the reasons why it's difficult for companies to deliver a true omni-channel experience is that we have gotten into the business of putting point solutions in. And every time we add a point solution to our total capability, we run the risk of denigrating the user experience. So I know Andre talked earlier about APIs, but I think APIs are going to be critical for us to have a disciplined ingesting process. And that's how we will truly drive omni-channel in the future. But we have to have common vernacular, and then those individual point solutions that you may be considering adding in, they're on their own journey, and doing a tech readiness assessment for their ability to integrate into your own infrastructure is critical.
I think
but I would say whoever typed that question, maybe give that company your direct feedback. Right, because sometimes, right, we build these things, we put these things together, and they miss the mark, right? And so one of the things I've done of late, I've been more bold, right? Again, just for the story that I started this webinar with, right? I gave some other ones the feedback. They kept on calling me. It's like, why are you still calling me? I made a purchase 2 weeks ago, right? You should have known that, right? You're kind of wasting your time. So I think this is going to be a journey, but I agree. I think with APIs, we're going to have to operate in more ecosystems. And I think as an industry, we're going to have to learn faster, but it's all based on your feedback, right? I mean, because ultimately, if we're not bringing more value, if we're not taking some of the friction out of that process, then we should stop doing it, right? And so, yes, maybe we we've all collectively invested in some point products that didn't serve the needs, we have to revisit those things quicker.
Yeah.
Fail
So choose your
fast.
favorite medium and fail fast. Feedback.
Yeah.
Let the companies find out. There's been a couple of questions on a theme that a lot of people are talking about at the moment, and I know the FT has reported a little on, the metaverse. How has the metaverse in any shape or form started to become a touch point in interactions with customers or employees? And are you guys starting to use the metaverse in any way as a way of interacting? I'm sorry, I should have said who would like to take that.
I'll take that one. I'll kick it off. The metaverse is interesting for multiple reasons. It's a new frontier. There's a lot of talk, a lot of hype behind it. For me personally, I don't believe we'll be having meetings in the metaverse in terms of making business decisions in that regard. But I do believe that the metaverse can enable and provide extremely unique customer experiences and customer and user experiences. Now, where that goes is largely dependent upon the individual organization and what they have prioritized for their customers and who their demographics are, who they serve, et cetera. But I think what I'm excited about the metaverse is that whole the possibility of what the metaverse means for consumers and customers and interacting with customers. I don't think that's very well built out just yet, which is why I'm interested in it, just because it's new, right? We're just kicking off. It's still a landscape that we're still defining, but I do anticipate some unique customer experiences coming as a result of the metaverse.
Can you expand on any of those customer experiences you expect?
Yeah, certainly. So you look at different conferences. I know Afrotech was one just in November 2021, 2021. I actually spoke at it, and it was interesting because it was a virtual conference, like a live chat like this, but everyone had their avatar. You can go to a different part of the virtual campus, the metaverse, engage with different users, their avatar. You can talk to one another, interact, play games, have a virtual happy hour, what have you. It was just a unique and an incredibly different experience than in-person conference, in lieu of not being able to meet in person, right? So what's the next level of that, right? We have a virtual conference where we have all these different engagements and outlets for customers to engage with one another. What's the next level, right? What's that 2.0? So I'm just curious of what that looks like and interested to see where that goes.
And do you think it'll ever be secure enough for, actually one person's interestingly brought up on the chat, secure enough for health professionals, for example, to interact with their patients?
I think it could be secure enough, but I think there is still, in my opinion, their jury is still out on the kinds of events people want to interact through avatar with. And so employee benefits, we have seen that virtual meeting environment that Andre talked about. So we certainly see that. And we see the use of avatar-like cartoons for video and explainer videos, etc. I'm not convinced that it meets the seriousness of the subject in the way employees want. And so that's something we will study. And I'm very interested to see, do people adopt the avatar mentality as a replacement for themselves?
Absolutely. And that's a great point, just in terms of the seriousness and kind of what is the severity of what we're discussing, right? As I kicked off, I don't envision ever talking to an emoji in a meeting, making a business decision, because that's essentially what the metaverse is, a series of emojis. And so that's not something that me personally, I would envision the metaverse being. But from a standpoint of, again, consumer events or we'll say lived off events, I think that's something from a consumer standpoint would be interesting.
Yeah, for us, I think it's interesting because we can actually, help people experience a portion of the vehicles, but there's nothing like, especially for like a hyper premium car, super premium car, like your Porsches, your Ferraris, your Aston Martins, cars like that, you really don't get to experience them unless you're behind the wheel. Like we can simulate a lot of it and we can get really good simulation in the metaverse. I can walk you around it. I can do pretty close to everything. But cars are tactile, right? You touch them, you feel them, you experience them. So it's how much of that can truly be experienced in the metaverse versus how much of that do you actually want to be behind the wheel? Because it's kind of hard to sell somebody on a Aston Martin. It's the experience you sell them on, right? And so without that, you could really be driving any car, right? Because it's the tactile experience that changes. So I think it'll be really interesting for that for us.
Very true. I will choose to have my Aston Martin in the real world, please.
Absolutely. Come on down to Park Lane.
Coming.
I have really enjoyed talking in our little virtual world here this afternoon to all of you. Really interesting insights. Thanks to the audience for all their questions and for tuning in. Just a last thing to say is you can follow all the tweets on hashtag FT Digital Dialogues, and the webinar will be available on demand for 30 days on the FT Live website. Thanks again for all your excellent contributions from my panel, and hope to see you again at the next FT Live event.
Thanks. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.